Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm just honored to see the room full and conversations happening. I know many of you, but there's some of you that I haven't had the chance to meet yet. My name's Jonathan Ingram, and I have the privilege of being the executive director of Chattanooga Faith Work Culture, and we are honored to host this Lunch and Learn series on reimagining work. Chattanooga Faith Work Culture is a local nonprofit, faith-based nonprofit, and our mission is to help equip Christians to be agents of kingdom renewal in the places God calls you to be. Your neighborhood, your city, but specifically we focus a lot of what we do on your work and what it means to engage that. We do a lot of different things out of our center. We run two different distinct fellowships. One is called the Chattanooga Fellows Program. Some of the young folks checking you in today are participants in our Chattanooga Fellows Program. They're recent college grads that have moved from around the country to Chattanooga and are getting plugged in to what it means to follow the Lord in a job and in a new city and in a new community. We also run a program called the Main and Market Fellows for established professionals. We have some participants and alumni of that program in the room as well. This is for people who are in a job already that already live in Chattanooga, and one night a week for 9 months, they come together and wrestle with what does it mean in light of their faith to do faithful work in the city and in the jobs they're called to be a part of. We put on events for entrepreneurs in town under the branding of Faith-Driven Entrepreneurs. So 4 quarterly events a year for people on the grind to come together and to meet one another and to be encouraged in light of their faith in the work they're doing. And we have some small groups running out of that as well. We have 16 entrepreneurs meeting right now. We have a group of 17 investors that are meeting right now about what's it mean in light of their faith to be in those spaces. We also have a class we call Faith and Work 101, and we've done it at some of your churches, you in the room here. We've done it at some businesses where we come in for 6 sessions and talk about a really quick overview of what the Bible says about the work we're called to do and what does God say about the thing that you're called to do 40 to 60 hours a week of your life. And then we do these things called Lunch and Learn events every other month, and right now we're in the 5th of our 6th on a series on reimagining work. So back in August, we started this series, and what we're doing and our goal with this series is to say, hey, the last couple of years have been a little bit crazy. Many of you in this room, I know personally, do not work at the same place you worked at the beginning of COVID. Some of you are still working at the same place, but you've had you've stepped back and the work looks different, or you've reimagined what it means to do it. And what we want to say is that the gospel should have something to say about the stuff that you're called to do Monday to Friday. And that not only does it about your personal walk with Jesus, but the things that you do, the things that we touch, the things that we get to be involved with, whether it's creating or stewarding, are impacted by this grand story of the gospel. And so what we've done over the last couple months is walk through some different types of work and some different ways of thinking about work to give us a sense about what does it mean for us to take that into our own context and to imagine what it means to honor God in the places we're called to be. In the room today, we have a lot of people doing lots of different things. Not all of you are architects or city planners, and that's what we're talking about today. But what we're going to do in front is give you an example of folks in those industries that are thinking about, that do good work, that are thinking about the good work that they do, partly in light of their faith. And my prayer for you is that as you're talking to people at tables, as you're engaging, that your imagination is stoked. For the places that you're called to inhabit, the places you're called to be faithful, and the places you're called to work. And I'm really pumped to talk about this topic because I love living in Chattanooga. I love what it means to walk around downtown. And I'm excited for us to think about it in new ways with folks that are much more wise than me to think about what it means for us as believers to navigate faithfully in those spaces. So if you're one of my 3 panelists, you can start making your way on up here. And we're going to get going here and have a conversation. So the way it's going to work is we're going to have a conversation in front of y'all, just kind of that I hope you can listen and it stokes your imagination. And then at the end, we're going to have a time for Q&A for you all to engage the speakers and ask questions that come to mind. So if you don't mind, welcome our panelists, and we'll let them introduce themselves here in a second. Here, I'm going to sit right here. Great. So instead of me trying to do an intro, well, why don't you two share that mic, and we'll share this one right here. I'd love for you guys to just start by telling us a little bit about yourself. What do you do for work? And specifically, when did you know you were passionate about what you get to do? You don't have to go. Anyone can go.
Sure, yeah, I'll start. Hey everybody, my name is Lyle. I work at Franklin Architects here in town. Let's see, gosh, when did I know that I was passionate about it? Yeah, I mean, I've always been passionate about anything that I'm doing, but getting pointed in the architecture direction. I come from a family of architects, but I actually started college in biochemistry, and I didn't shift into it until my sophomore year of college at UT, when one of my dad's former roommates, who was a professor, kind of got me sidelined, and I was helping him do building analysis, and I'd never really understood the difference between mere building and architecture, right? The part where the building does something that is more than just the sum of its constituent parts. I'd never actually experienced that until that moment. I thought, wow, you know, I think this blending of techniques and art and creating something that is more than just the space, that creates place and memory and inspiration and all those kind of things that I think are gifts that are imparted, you know, to us by the Lord, that to kind of get to participate in that. I never understood that you could do that through, you know, sort of sticks and bricks, if you will, and then it's sort of been in it ever since that. So.
Good morning. My name is Donna Williams, Donna C. Williams, because there's so many Donna Williamses. I don't want anybody coming and looking for me and they're looking for the wrong Donna Williams. So Donna C. Williams. I am a native of Chattanooga. I lived here most of my life, but spent 11 years in Atlanta, which I enjoyed very much. But I came home a few years ago, more years than it seems, to look after my mother, who at the time was ill, but she's fabulous. She's better than I am right now. She's doing well. Whole family's doing well. But my passion is serving the underserved, very specifically in housing. So if you can imagine, if you spent all day in either intentionally, unintentionally, consciously or unconsciously, worrying about where you were going to live, or where your kids were going to live, or if they're safe where they live, or if you can afford where they live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a lot of wasted energy and creativity, and we have way too many people, working people, in that situation here in Chattanooga. So very passionate about housing, very passionate about architecture, which is probably how I met this gentleman years ago. Love construction, I love anything related to housing, and it's my pleasure to be able to do that with what I do now, and also in my previous capacity as the administrator for the Department of Economic and Community Development, which included all things building.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Hi, I'm Bert Kuyrkendall, and is that on? Okay, good. And I'm an engineer and planner, and I think my aha moment was when, after Katrina, I was in the Mississippi Gulf Coast area, and after Katrina, there was a lot of planning work that looked to re-envision what the Gulf Coast and New Orleans could become. And at that point, I'd been a pretty conventional engineer, designing conventional subdivisions. And I realized that these ideas were ideas that were really time-tested. And it's the way I grew up. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi where I could walk to school, walk to anything. There was a lot of freedom, and there was a lot of benefit and health to that too. That kind of woke me up to there's a different way to plan new neighborhoods. There's a different way to retrofit existing neighborhoods. And so that kind of got me on this rabbit trail. And also, before then, I had a foray doing mission work in Peru. I learned a lot there about healthy neighborhoods, but also I realized that, like ministry, I'd always thought ministry was like the ultimate calling, and I realized that wasn't my calling. And when I discovered like this, it kind of became my life's passion and work to help create healthy places for people to live, and to enable human flourishing would kind of be the core of it.
Well, we're in Chattanooga, and there's a lot of change that's happening in the downtown corridor in particular, but all over the city that things are happening. And many of us call home different parts of town and places. One of the things I asked you is, what is your favorite place or space in Chattanooga? And what about that place or space draws you in, that makes it a place that you enjoy being? And what does it bring out of you as you go into that space or place and anywhere in our city?
I'll go. Anywhere I live, wherever my home is, wherever my spot is, that's my favorite place. I'm a real homebody, so right now my favorite space is the courtyard in the back of my house, and I live in the M.L. King neighborhood. So I love the neighborhood and the context of the neighborhood and the diversity in the architecture and the diversity in the incomes of people and ideas and walkers and bikers and drivers, et cetera, et cetera. So right now my favorite place is my courtyard.
I think one of my favorite places is the little market in Hill City that's down the hill from Stringer's Ridge on Spears. And that's something that used to kind of flourish in neighborhoods, a little neighborhood market where you could kind of go and get everything you needed. It was kind of a little hub for the neighborhood, so I recommend it. But there's a lot of great things happening in that neighborhood. You have access to healthy foods. There are great parks, great social areas. So I think there's a lot to emulate from that area.
I thought about this question a little bit last night, and I was trying to think, and let my mind kind of wander around town a little bit, thinking about like that space, but this space is a little bit different. And I think one of the spaces that I kind of kept coming back to is the sort of the south end of the Walnut Street Bridge, where the Ed Johnson Memorial is. That intersection, that kind of confluence of things right there, I think embodies a lot about when we think about the spice of life and the sort of what makes the city special and what makes the experience of being in a city enjoyable. You have people commuting through there. There's always people on bicycles heading to and from work, long distances. You've got tourists there's always somebody over there taking pictures, and people, there's so many different groups of people with different things going on that all kind of converge right there, and you're close to some of the really neat pieces and stuff. And I think, I work in the North Shore, and I walk across the Walnut Street Bridge quite a bit at lunch. And I always really just kind of like lingering there just to observe and see the variety of people and activities that's always kind of crossing up right there at that space. You've got cars that drive in there and use it for the hotel. And so, you kind of have all this different stuff going on right there, and it all works, and it feels nice and looks nice and all that.
That's good. So, this event is being put on for us to think about this in light of our faith. And oftentimes, it's easy for Christians. Our faith is what we do on Sunday. It's a personal walk with Jesus. We have our quiet time in the morning. We go to a job, and we try not to curse too much at our job and make some money so we can tithe on Sunday for the real professional Christians. But why are you laughing? But why should, in y'all's opinion, why should people of faith care about things like development, care about city design? Where does this fit into the context of people that want to follow Jesus? What does this mean for those? Why should this be an important thing that's on their heart and mind?
Yeah, so I think we, maybe it's a kind of a part of our culture. We think very individualistically. We kind of think of ourselves as self-made. We don't realize the impact that our environment has on us, and really where you live has a big determinant on kind of where you're going to go in life, where we go in life. So it opens up opportunities, or it keeps you isolated. Are you able to get to education, to jobs? Is there good social infrastructure in your neighborhood? And that's a term that basically is referring to places like parks, libraries, community centers, any place where social capital, where relationships are formed, and where community cohesion happens. So do we live in a place that fosters those things, where you rub shoulders with someone that can help you, that can help you get a job, that can help you make a connection? If you have a small business, that can help you, further that small business. So if we're just thinking about individuals, we're not thinking about where they live, then we're really only seeing kind of a slice of the picture. Sorry.
I think, one of the interesting things I think about our panel is that, so Bert's work sort of like takes the big broad brush strokes of drawing, of the big community planning, kind of really high level, lots of land being drawn in that. My work is sort of plugging in the buildings within those larger plans, sort of one at a time, fleshing them out. And the work that Donna had been doing as the director of the economic and community development at the city of Chattanooga, it's like tilling the soil and making sure that it's the right conditions for making all that prosper. And to me, it's sort of like, I think about the disciples are a little bit like me in that they weren't always really following it or getting much of what was going on. They're a pretty good, relatable group of folks. And it's like it seems like they kept pressing and pressing of like, okay, tell us, what's the most important stuff? And it sort of, it seems like it boils down to two things: love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think when given the context, like if you look at like the work that the three of us, like that sort of like the combination of those three things, the underlying motivation is that love, and is love your neighbor. And if all of that energy that's going into that is seeing that, then that to me sort of moves it in that direction of shalom, of like seeking that the peace that sort of is overflowing and bountiful, that I think that we're called to do. I think that's my.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really, for me, it's very simple. Is that I want to make sure that what I do every day gives a voice to people who aren't me and aren't like me. One of my good friends who's in the room, who I won't call him out, we were talking earlier, and he said that there was an African-American woman who both of us know told him he needs more African-American women in his life. And I was like, everybody needs more African-American women in their lives, right? And that's true. And I'm not going to get on my soapbox about this, but in Chattanooga, even my best, smartest, most woke friends who do some of the work that we all do, when I talk to them about stuff and I mention African American or whatever, they immediately go to the lowest common denominator, and they're thinking that I'm talking about people who are in need and are asking for something, right? So some of my best friends, and I have to say to them, no. I'm talking about a black person, but I'm not talking about a poor person. So the more you have time to spend with different types of people, the more you will understand you can't just characterize people very easily. But a lot of Chattanoogans do not have the opportunity to really know and spend time with people who aren't like them, which is very dangerous. And so what I like to remind people of is, when we're talking about data-driven XYZ, fill in the blank, that the data are people, almost always. And so what I want to advocate for those of us who often are part of that data gathering that leads to fundraising and budget increases and so on and so forth, to remember that that money came about because the data, which are us, allowed that money to be funneled into government and other resources for funding. So make sure that those of you who are looking at data understand that data are their people, right?
Thank you guys for sharing that. I think I love the common denominator was everything you talked about wasn't necessarily about the space or the building. It was about what was happening there in a people-centric way. And as people of faith, Matt, thank you for tying that into this whole idea of loving God and loving neighbor. I think that's a really important thing. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But when we got together to talk about today, there's just so much wisdom here. And I was like, we don't have 2 days to do all this, guys. We have 40 minutes to talk. And so I said, let's keep it on stories. And so one thing I'd love for you guys to be able to share is there a project that you've had the chance to work on and be a part of that you think has been crucial in transforming an area or been a part of the renewal of a space here in Chattanooga or somewhere else that you'd love to share a specific example of a project you feel proud to have been a part of?
Can I go first?
Yeah, please do.
Mine is future. I'm super excited, ridiculously so, about the redevelopment of the West Side. So if you have time, just go to West Side Evolves and you'll see a lot about the history of the West Side, public housing. And that's where I grew up. My family, a full nucleus family, we lived in the West Side until I think I was in the first grade. And we were the first black family to buy a home in the neighborhood where we moved. And my parents' desire to do that really led to a lot of opportunities for me and my siblings. So that's another reason I'm super passionate about home ownership and the security of homes. And if you go to, I don't care how much or how little someone's rent is, or their house, their mortgage is, or where their tent is located, you will see people making that place beautiful because that's home to them. And I'm super excited about the West Side because Mayor Bert, for whom I worked, made a commitment, negotiated with the Housing Authority to make sure that every person that lives in the West Side now has an opportunity to return, either as a renter or a homeowner. And so that's their neighborhood. And many, many, many people want to stay in their neighborhood, but some want to leave. They've not lived outside of their neighborhood. They want to live somewhere else and see what the rest of Chattanooga looks like. So the design studio has done a world-class job of communicating with, getting information from, supporting the neighborhood. Hard work, some of the hardest work I've seen done, undertaken in Chattanooga, to make sure that that transition brings along as many of those residents in the way that they want to be brought along as anything I've ever seen in Chattanooga, or I really can't think of anywhere else at the moment. So I'm super excited about the West Side.
That's awesome. Yeah, I could add, the project I was really happy to be involved with was the Virginia Avenue Greenway. And it's when I lived in St. Elmo, but the planning for it went back. I was talking to Chris Carson this morning with Bike Walk Chattanooga. That started with the visioning process in 2012, I think, with the Think Bike came from the Dutch Bike Embassy. Anyway, but basically, if you haven't seen it, it's like an alley and a street converted into a neighborhood greenway through really simple means. It's a really cost-effective way to not only create a way for people to move through a neighborhood, but also it creates community because people are there all the time, bumping into people. If you live on it or near it, you know the value. But I worked on a similar project in Birmingham, and it's called the Titusville Neighborway. And really similar, we just patched together streets for walking, biking. There's still car access, but limited car access. And it's become a real hub for the community and connected housing project, the neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood, to the park, and then from there to the downtown, opportunities downtown.
We do a bit of like community design and some new urban developments and things like that in our office, and there's some that's like, man, I'd really love to give a plug for how awesome I am at drawing things and talk about some of those. But I think the thing that the project that I've gotten to work on recently that I think I want to bring up to answer your question is the Parks and Outdoors Master Plan. I got the opportunity to be on the steering committee for that initiative, and Scott, who's sitting back there, and the vision for where the way that community space can and will shape the future of the community. If you haven't spent any time with that document, now that it's public, right? Yes, okay. Now that it's public, I would spend some time with it and really dig into it because I think it's a really exciting time for conversations like this for where we are, and that document is sort of challenged to try to be the blueprint for the next 100 years of town. And if we're moving towards 300,000 people in Chattanooga, they're coming whether we're thinking about it or not, and then sort of, either that development is going to happen in a way that is equitable and beautiful and sustainable from an environmental standpoint, and all of the things that make the flourishing, or it's not. And I think that plan is sort of like, I think it's not that type of, the things that are in that plan, they're not the things that we should do on the back end. Like, oh, now we have people, let's put in the community space where people can get together. It's like, no, this is the stuff we need to put in on the front end to then make sure that the people get together and we get this community thing right, because we get one. I think one of the experiences that I've had as a practitioner is it's really hard to undo things once they're done. Once the buildings are built, once they've come out or meet the street or don't meet the street, once we set that context, it's really expensive and really hard to undo it. And so being very I think that's one of the pieces that for me is like, we can talk about style all day long and have lots of colorful conversation about that as an architect. I just want us to make sure that the buildings address everything around them correctly. And if we get that right, then that's the rest of it is less important. But I think that plan is something that I got to work on that to me is really, really exciting and cool.
So this is kind of like a building off of that question as we think more about the city. And one thing, my prayer for everyone leaving today is that places that you pass regularly, you will look at differently. Places that you use and participate in that space, you will look at it differently. So I don't know if you'd be willing to share somewhere you've seen in town where has been transformed and is being used in really great ways on top of what you've already shared. And then besides the West Side, which is a really exciting project, what are parts of town where city design and plan needs to be put into place as we try to think about what we've been talking about, that these things need to be provided for everyone in our city to be able to engage, and what that does to bring shalom and peace and be about loving neighbor?
Okay, I'll dive in. Yeah, so I kind of dwell in the transportation realm a lot. I do general planning, but transportation really is my passion. And there have been a lot of policies that have really divided our city over the years. Redlining, which didn't enable low-income people to purchase houses in their neighborhoods. Freeways that chopped neighborhoods off from the rest of town, or they actually plowed through black neighborhoods. We've got a real history, but also just infrastructure. I remember I used to work for the city, and we looked at paving, and we looked at paving per the council districts, and the lower income neighborhoods had worse paving scores than the higher income neighborhoods. And a lot of that, I don't know if it was a overarching strategy, but a lot of it is the squeaky connected wheels get the oil. So there are infrastructure disparities too. So what can be done to kind of tie those things together? I think Martin Luther King Boulevard is a great example. It was originally 4-lane, one-way street, eastbound. I don't know if everyone here realizes that. 4 lanes eastbound. McCallie was 4 lanes westbound. Average speed was probably 60 miles an hour as cars plowed through the neighborhoods. So the first step, I think in 2000s, in the aughts, was to make them 2-way. Then the second step in 2016, 17 was to go from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, which really calmed traffic down, made it more pedestrian scaled, made it safer to cross the street, streetscaping, bike lanes, street trees, all those things that made it a good human environment. And it's really, and that paired along with a lot of economic development work along the corridor has really done a lot to make that corridor a great, flourishing place again.
Can you remind me of the question again, Jonathan? Yeah. A place that we see a lot of good stuff going on right now.
Yeah, where have you seen an intentional design bring flourishing or renewal to a space? And then the flip side of that question is just where are places we need to be thinking about that you see coming down the pipeline, whether we talked about West Side already, but other parts of town that there's things that could be done in the design of a space to bring flourishing?
For sure. Thank you. One of the hats that I wear is as one of the members of the Chattanooga-Hamilton County Regional Planning Commission. So as a planning commissioner, I do get to see all of the plans that are seeking approval that are kind of coming through in the whole county and all and around. And I think I think we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work all over the place, but I think we were talking about something as I was walking to lunch here today. I think there's still a lot of what we would call missing teeth. So like if the like urban fabric, especially in the city center, is like like a good block of buildings where it's all buildings. If you can imagine that being like a real pretty smile, when you have a tooth knocked out of it, it's kind of a little weird. And I think there has been a lot of really great work that has been done in this town for several decades, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't sort of look around and take an inventory and say we still have some places to do some work. I think one of the fears that I have, having come from the Nashville area and having been part of a 10-county think tank that started in the early 2000s to try to implement smart growth, that when Nashville became the it city and became the dog that caught the bus, they basically took all of that work and threw it out. And it's like, oh, the money's here now, let's just build whatever wherever, and it's not working out so well. I think there are other cities in the Southeast that we could learn some lessons from. We've got a lot of development going on right now, and I think we just need to leverage the really great resources and the really incredible people that we have here to get ahead of some of that stuff. That I think.
Having worked for the city for 8 years and seen in every bit and part of all of this, I tend to be a highly practical person anyway, but when you know how it works, when you've seen how the sausage is made, I would tell Mayor Bert, I totally underestimated the politics of political service. Because things happen just as you described, where the city council person who runs their own business, they're retired, they can do whatever they want, they're free and smart and all those things. And then you have council people who are working every day and trying to be a council person. So the effects of that are seen because they cannot be researching and working and going to conferences and doing all these things all day, every day, because they're working. Whereas another council person may have, all day to do whatever they want to do in service to the city. So when I think about it from a practical sense, I do not have an answer. I do not have an answer because it takes money, and it takes a lot of money, and a lot of sources of money. And the city, any city, no city, has enough money to do everything that needs to be done. And so we have to solicit the assistance of the private sector. And sometimes to the extent that that dog, or whatever the right analogy is driving the bus. They didn't catch the bus, but they're driving the bus, okay? So I really don't have an answer.
Yeah, just piggyback on that a good place to focus are corridors because it is a big city and the needs are incredible. So, but think of a corridor like Brainerd Road, a lot of traffic, it's a lot of transit use. It's the heaviest used bus line in the city that goes from downtown to Hamilton Place. So is there an opportunity on Brainerd Road to make it more pedestrian friendly, to add mixed use, to add housing there, increase the density along the corridor? Another location would be Rossville Boulevard. Places where people can live, affordable housing can be built, new retail can be reestablished in those places, but also upgrade the transit service so that it's frequent. It's every 15 minutes, not every 45 minutes to an hour. And I think the city's moving toward that. They're about to kick off an area plan, or kind of re-kick off the area plan effort that's going to look at those corridors and also neighborhood nodes. And I know there are things happening at Carter now too, so I'm kind of excited to see what happens next. But real quick, and not just city, but also suburb, how can a suburb become more sustainable, more focused on equity? Well, there's opportunities to create places in suburbs. As people remote working more and more now, they need a place to go to that's a third place or a commercial place, a social place where they can meet their neighbors, but also opportunity for affordable housing in the suburbs. So just want to throw that in too.
I think what it's like, what's the why? To some extent, as you're talking, Bert, I was kind of thinking about, there's some aspects of it that we know are good if we, if we structure our city in a way that you can access things by walking to them. I think there's one side of that is, sort of like, trying to think of the right way to articulate this. The part that I kind of wanted to discuss in it is that we can't love our neighbor if we don't know who they are. We don't know that somebody needs something unless we talk to them. And if we don't structure our lives in a way where we have the encounters with other people, we don't set up the ability to love one another in that way. And also, it's like, you start thinking about, so all this development's going to bring in all this traffic and all this stuff. And, and one of the ways to solve traffic is to never get into your car in the first place. But so if you don't have to drive it, then because traffic is everybody else on the road, right? It's not me. They say, like, you're not in traffic, you are traffic.
Yeah.
And traffic is also, I think, it's one of the things we always talk about, but it's really more of like a symptom. It's a symptom of an illness. It's not the illness itself. It's one piece within a really complicated crossing of lots of different systems, but it's one of the ones that we really understand. We don't understand the economic realities that shape part of what happened to, some of the underlying not physical manifestations, the traffic piece. And it also feels like we can really address that one. But what ends up happening is with that physical restructuring is that we create the places for the human flourishing and for our faith to be lived out, like in our day-to-day, where it's not that, I get in my car and I drive 45 minutes to the Bible study at your house and I pass a lot of people that we could have had relationship and talked to the whole way back and forth, or that all of my friends, they live in other places and I don't know the people that live on either side of me. That they're those the way that we structure that also influences the way that I think we can be the body.
Yeah. One example someone shared with me one time, architect, it might have been you, Matt, I don't remember, but the idea that when we moved our main houses from being the focal point being a front porch to being the garage that we drive our car into, we've completely changed how we interact with our neighbors, right? When we walk down the street at 3 miles an hour, We experience that space different than when we ride a bike at 15 miles an hour than how we experience the space when we drive by at 35 or 50 miles an hour. And all those speak to this idea of how do we know and love our neighbor. And as people of faith, that should be something that we should be thinking about and caring about, right? Last question I have, I think, unless you guys have like 2-second answers on it, is you guys are people of faith. The reason I wanted you to share is you do excellent work in the areas that you focus on, and you're experts at what you do. I hope you've learned something, you're thinking about something a little different. But you also all are believers. So moving instead of macro to everyone else, how Christians should think about it, how does your faith, your walk with Jesus inform the work you do? How does it be a part of what drives you and what you get to do?
Yeah, I think for me, my faith really kind of establishes the framework that really, I think it kind of explains what I see happening, in cities and places, and kind of what my response should be to it, if that makes sense. There's a definite realism in the Bible that says, individuals are amazing. We're made in God's image. We're very flawed. We're very selfish. And that's reflected not in individuals only, but also in culture, because culture, society, it's a grouping of individuals. So you can see that play out with individuals. You can see it play out with policies and cities. That's important to me. It gives me the framework for what I do and the motivation for what I do. And I think, like I said at the very beginning, it really has become my ministry. When I work with a consulting firm that does planning, when we go to a community or a neighborhood, we're interacting with the people there, but we're also thinking, I think of it missionally. How can we make this a happier, safer place, a place that inspires equity, a place that pulls people together, creates community. So it definitely informs what I do.
You didn't let me use your mic this time.
I'm sorry.
Number one, I try not to curse at work.
Try.
Sometimes it's hard, even when I'm working at home by myself. The other thing is, it's hard, but I try to remember that love from a Christian perspective, Christ, we don't earn it. We don't have to earn it. We have it. He gave that to us. And I try to be patient with people and not judge when I really want to, and try to just kind of, put myself in somebody else's shoes and oftentimes focus on the least among us. That's kind of how I think about it.
I think for me, I get the opportunity to work in a creative profession. We do part of that's relational, right? I mean, the work of as an architect, my work, we make a building. We make the drawings for a building out of nothing but conversations, and so there's a huge relational aspect. There's so much, and for us, and I feel like, to me, good projects always just come out of good relationships. And I think that's part of that shalom and flourishing thing of that, it becomes evident, it sort of spills out. And it feels like all the projects that we end up winning design awards for, that people step back and say, that's a great looking building. It's it was a really great relationship with that client. But I think the creativity that God allowing us to be participatory in that creative process, and that is one of the most I think wonderful pieces of why I do what I do. But at the same time, it also gives me the ability to say that I'm not in control of it all, and that we are moving from the garden to the ultimate city where all things are made new. That kind of eschaton. That it takes a little bit of pressure off, I think at the end of the day, I'm a part of the work. It is not me, and I hate. I think maybe for some architects that don't have a faith, that if at the end of their careers it was all about making themselves their legacy and their history and their making this thing. I think that's a dangerous thing. And so for me, that's how my faith sort of informs my work. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love, Genesis 1 talks with God places the man and woman in a garden, and immediately they're starting to make it a place to live and to steward and to cultivate. And then at the end of all time, I love how you just mentioned that when the Bible talks about God renewing all things to himself, it's not renewing us back to a garden. It talks about a city that's made of human artifacts that have taken God's creation and making something beautiful to live in, a space to inhabit. And that's when it talks about heaven and what that's going to be, it's going to be a city. And in some ways, when we get to do little pieces of that now and the work y'all get to do, we get a little small picture of what is being restored for us forever, which is, I hope that's a thing that drives us and what it means as believers to move forward in the work we're called to do now. Can we give our panelists a round of applause? Thank you guys so much. Well, we're going to open the floor up. If there are any questions out there, we have a few minutes. I want to be respectful to end right at 1, but if there's any questions that y'all have that you want to ask of our panelists.
Chuck Marone, Charles Marone, Chuck Marone. Planning world.
I think it has a big impact, especially, we do a lot of work with small towns and communities, and they're dealing with a lot of the issues that Strong Towns brings up, especially the fiscal side of things. So to give an example, we just did a comprehensive plan for Madison, Alabama, west of Huntsville, which is rapidly growing. And we did a modeling exercise using Legos where citizens came together and they planned the future of their city with Legos representing different development types. But the different development types have different impacts on city budget and on transportation that were taken into account during the game, and they had to give money back and forth. So that's just, I guess, an example. We do use those principles. The problem with low density residential development is it doesn't pay for itself fiscally from a city perspective. It costs more to serve it with infrastructure than it receives in tax benefit. But that's what everybody wants, and that's what they want the neighboring property to be also. So we try to pull out those principles when we can.
Any other questions? Or you want to answer?
Well, there were two things that I was thinking about. One, is that what everybody wants? Well, I mean, because because
in a lot of suburban communities, that's what people want.
And I think part of one of the things that, like, when we compare apples to apples, sometimes it might seem like that feels like the preferential, but I think the thing is that we don't always have a lot of really good precedent because we're not comparing apples to apples, right?
Right.
And so the give and take is what you get by not doing it that way is a really, you have to experience it. And I think I heard it put once that, like, the expansive development is you're always selling something that is losing value, because if I move way far away from everybody because I want to be far away from everybody, and then turns out development follows me out there, then I got to do it again. Because the more of everybody that follows me out there, the less of the thing that I wanted there is. So it's on a declining trajectory. Versus if we're building it where it's about community, and the more of us that we have, the more community we have, then we're developing in a way that is ever gaining, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that to me is like, we got to get the enough of the experiences that, like I think about my boss Bob Franklin, my business partner. he's more like my dad that I didn't want, but I love Bob. He moved off of he lived out in Walden for 50 years or whatever. He just moved down into Fort Wood, and he loves it. He is like, I love city living. I see so many people, and granted, Bob's gregarious, but to see him experiencing that has been a really neat thing to be on the side of. The other piece that I was thinking of was that I think, so some of the work, I sit on the board of directors at Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise, and we kind of have we have an assessment score for every single block in the entire town of on a varying level of decline to understand. A consultant named Charles Buki came in, did this incredible report about the kind of neighborhood, where are we as neighborhoods and zip codes in terms of how much work do we have to do ahead of us. Really thorough, incredible report. But what I was thinking about is you don't have to be building new buildings. You don't have to be designing entire neighborhoods and doing what any of us do to move the needle in that direction. I mean, all it takes is tending to your block, or the bit of street out in front of your own house, or like my wife always gets on me because I'm a maniac. I mow the verge in the entire block of wherever we are because it looks better when it's clean, and pick up the trash and mow and blow the street, the whole block. I don't know why I'm wired that way, but I am. And I would just encourage everybody that you don't have to be designing 10-story buildings, or a developer who's plugging in the next incredible thing in order to seek the peace of the city. You can do it by literally just picking up some trash and taking care of the little bit of sphere that each of us can influence. Yeah, I'd start by reading Jane Jacobs' books. No. Great question, Matt. I'll put on my planning commissioner hat and get involved in the public process, in the political process, because that's where all of these decisions are made and happen. And I also am the president of AIA of Tennessee, and chair our government relations committee to try to keep my finger on the pulse of what legislation is happening in Nashville as it pertains to the building environment as well. The political side is not fun. It is often messy, and the sausage making is not pretty. But if we as the public don't, and to some extent the process is set up to try to keep us out of it, we have to stay in it. Because if we don't, then whatever's going to happen is going to happen. There's nobody in the room to ask or say otherwise.
And I know you guys have to go. But the systems that you talked about, Matt, those systems worked exactly as they were designed. So were there some unintended consequences? Yeah. But what happened was it was supposed to happen. That's the way it was designed. So to prevent that is for those of us who care about that to be vocal, regularly, knowledgeable, patient, and kind, but to be there when those decisions are being discussed and those decisions are being made.
And even on the hyper-local level, everyone here lives in a neighborhood. So there are opportunities to, get your neighborhood together, maybe have a block party, maybe get involved in your neighborhood association. And there can be simple projects like tactical projects where you go out and you have bollards. You create a bike lane, you create a space. Maybe you put bollards around the corner or cones around the corner where kids are crossing the street to slow down cars. You can work for traffic calming in your neighborhood, but also with your church. So you're going to give out the resource page, right? Awesome. So there's a great podcast that's called The Embedded Church. And have you been on it yet? You should be on The Embedded Church. Good. But a lot of that focuses on how churches can become the third spaces for their neighborhood. Third space is not home, it's not work, it's public, semi-public space. How can the church become the anchor for the neighborhood? How can the church be physically outward focused so that people from that area are welcome to be there? So those are some ways to get plugged in.
We are out of time, so thank you all so much for making time to be here. Thank you for being here. Can we give them one more round of applause?